Welcome to the Oshkosh Area School District Board of Education regular meeting for Wednesday, December 2nd, 2020. Has this meeting been properly noticed?
Yes, it has.
Would you please call the roll?
Olmsted?
Here.
Peschel? Here. Szilagyi?
Here.
Carlin?
Here.
Evans?
Here.
Garner?
Here.
Herzog?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. At this point, we move on to the agenda item for the Pledge of Allegiance. Dr. Cartwright.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next, we move on to board and administrative reports. Starting with the board president report. I decided to take a little different approach tonight to the board president's report. At this time of year, I think like many of us, we tend to take a look back at what's happened during the last 11 months of the calendar year and reflect on the positives as well as the negatives. And this year has been extremely difficult on everybody. But my decision with regard to my annual holiday letter, and yes, I still do those, was to take a positive approach. And as I was doing that, I was also reflecting on our school district, and particularly our board and our central leadership team, and looking at what are some of the positives that have taken place this year, actions and activities from a leadership perspective. And you'll see on the screen shortly a summary of what I attempted to pull together to highlight some of the positives. It's easy, I think, in this year in particular to be focused on what we've missed, what we've lost out on, and what we wish we had. But I also think it's valuable to take a look at the positive. There's a lot going on in our community and our nation. And when you look at references to mental health, the references seem to focus on what are the positives, and let's not dwell so much on the negatives. And so with that in mind, I put together this summary, and I divided it into two parts. January to August. January, February were fairly normal in our school district compared to what followed. And then March to early June was very different. Summer school was different, and then preparation for the current school year, which the school year began in September. However, preparations were underway before that. And it also seemed to me that it made sense to take a look at these leadership actions and activities through the lens of our mission statement, our vision statement, our guiding principle of students first, and the 5 strategic goals which make up our strategic plan. So what you see on the screen will show you the mission, vision, guiding principle, as well as the 5 strategic plan goals. When you look at the 5 strategic plan goals with their titles, what is missing would be the priorities under each one. Each one of those has 3 to 5 phrases that further define them. So for example, under improving student learning, there's a provision in there for professional development of staff so that they're up to speed in terms of working with students. And I'd just like to highlight a few of these for you tonight. I know you can all read these, but I know you're seeing it for the first time as well. If you look at January to August, there was a emphasis in March to June to get instructional materials to students, and that meant running off materials for the K-2 students who at that time did not have Chromebooks. We also made hotspots available to students who did not have them because that's part of equal opportunities, equitable opportunities for our students. There was a big emphasis on providing meals for our students, and not only our students but for family members. And that allowed us to continue to employ our food service and other personnel to make sure that our students were ready to learn and had food to do that. Letter I talks about listening to students, parents, staff, and administration recommendations to amend various practices, including moving to a pass-fail system for high school students. M and N refer to staff training so that staff were better prepared to utilize the technology with the students. Learning from home was new for a lot of us. A lot of the students, a lot of the staff, and certainly parents, and so providing that training was very important. There were a couple of things that were, I think, rather unique last year, and fit under the, for me, they fit under the vision, especially being innovative. Two of them deal with our students with special needs. R does, coordinating a transition fair for students with disabilities in transition programs so that they can be successful. There was also collaboration going on with the EAA for a program called Project 21, an innovative educational programming innovative educational programming involving the EAA Museum. And letter X, we authorized the establishment at North High School of a technology and innovation lab, also called the Fab Lab, where students learn engineering and robotics and all kinds of things that maybe weren't in high school when at least some of us around the table were high schoolers ourselves. Then moving on to September to December, early December, we've now provided Chromebooks for all students. So all of the K-2 students who in the spring the spring semester did not have access now do. We also again provided hotspots to families and students so that they would be able to access the internet. Again, we've provided a lot of emphasis on feeding our students, making sure that we're being sensitive to the situation in our community and across our country in terms of food insecurities. Under number 5, we note that we've purchased a variety of materials to make our schools safer: masks, sanitizers, not only hand sanitizers, but also these devices that I've seen some of our custodians use. They remind me of the movie Ghostbusters, if any of you remember that, where they go in and they spray for elimination of germs. And also social distancing. And we had all of that in place on day one of the school year. We'd also received a $375,000 grant, which is rather substantial, to address district safety concerns. And looking forward, we've authorized the purchase under number 8 of new Chromebooks for the fall of 2021. That's really important because we want to make sure that our students have the learning materials that they need, the equipment and the supplies to be successful in school. And we know that by getting our order in early, that we're more likely to get those devices in time for the fall of 2021. Under number 10, that Technology Innovation Lab, or the Fab Lab, has been created at Oshkosh North. We've expanded our e-academy both in terms of staffing and in terms of program offerings to address the increased enrollment that we've seen. There were a lot of facility upgrades that took place and were ready for the fall of 2020. Some of those took place in summer 2020, and some actually took place in the spring of 2020. I think another innovation that I find most interesting is expanding our pool of substitute teachers by reaching out to our paraprofessionals who qualified to go through substitute teacher training so that we have trained professionals in our schools when we have shortages of substitutes. These are people who know our students, they know our buildings, they know our procedures, and students know them. We've coordinated with UW-Oshkosh for COVID-19 antigen testing to, again, a safety situation. Moving on, I think one of the things that this board has been very interested in and very supportive of has been coordinating efforts with the City of Oshkosh and a private donor to provide free use of Oshkosh transit buses by our students. We initially approved that for a 2-year period. If you read the Herald today, they talk about the City Council approving that for a 3rd year, and it's on our agenda tonight to do that for a 3rd year. There are several business-related changes and updates we've accomplished this year, which I think demonstrate innovation of the district. One is refinancing the district debt at a lower interest rate. We've also implemented greater efficiencies within our business office with software as well as staff training. And we approved a levy that is lower than the 2020 levy. The 2021 levy would be lower were it not for the passage of the referendum. We've also done a number of things with regard to personnel. Under 24, we've expanded the number of school nurses to better serve our students and to be more available to students in each of our buildings. We've hired a social worker for the 4K program to deal with some of the issues that those little people deal with. We've expanded our on-site mental health services into more of our schools. We've worked with Catalpa to expand services by having follow-up services with students in need, and recently passed a policy which requires that we inform parents when they're going to be working with students in schools, and the students may be missing a class. 28 notes again our emphasis on addressing the needs of all of our students, particularly those with disabilities, by providing life skills that students with disabilities will need in the future in order to live independently. Number 32, we've developed health and safety protocols to ensure that our high school winter sports season can help meet the needs of our students in a safe atmosphere. And number 36, I haven't said much about working with the community, but we've raised funds for the Technology and Innovation Lab at North, that Fab Lab, through public and private partnerships. Putting in a Fab Lab is a very expensive venture, and there have been times when there have been state funds made available for that, but usually the number of districts applying far exceeds the ability of the grant to fund all of those. So it's I think, a great tribute to our district leadership for seeing that through, so that our students have some of the innovative opportunities that students in other school districts may have. So that basically is my report tonight, kind of a summary of the year 2020. And I've done my best to align each of those items with the district's mission, vision, guiding principle of students first, and then the 5 pillars of the strategic plan. So I thank you for your indulging me with the opportunity to share that, and just to put a positive spin on what has been a challenging year for everyone, and we do recognize that. So I thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to the superintendent's report.
Thank you very much, Dr. Herzog. So we're going to go ahead and get started right away with Oshkosh North High School. And students in the communities at Oshkosh North program have been very busy. Level 2 students recently organized a virtual mock election for the Oshkosh North student body. Although this was a mock election, students got to show their civic engagement and understand the value of being civically involved. Level 1 students are currently learning about poverty, especially its impact in the city of Oshkosh. As a part of the learning unit, students are once again participating in the annual Oshkosh Fire Department and Salvation Army Food and Toy Drive. This year, donations can be dropped off at Station 15, which is located across the street from the Convention Center. The dropout dates would be December the 3rd, the 7th, and the 9th between the hours of 5:30 and 7:30 p.m. All are encouraged to participate and help those in need. And in fact, if you tuned in this morning to the news station, they were on the news a few times this morning, bright and early.
That would be about 5:30 in the morning. I did set my alarm early, as had been recommended, to participate in seeing our students. That was great. Thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and transition on over to Carl Traeger Elementary School. Recently received handmade desk, made and donated by Gary Nordus. The desk will be gifted to a few lucky Carl Traeger first graders in an effort to support their virtual learning experience. Oshkosh West art students have been busy exploring their talents. A visual art show was developed to spotlight their efforts, and the community is invited to check out the incredible artwork, which is available on this slide and on the district website. Staff at Merrill Elementary School recently gave 4 families a Thanksgiving to remember. Merrill staff donated food or money to purchase food for over the holiday weekend. All 4 families received baskets filled with meat, fruit, vegetables, canned goods, and of course, a turkey. The families were very grateful and appreciative of the donated food when it was safely dropped off on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. The Oshkosh Area School District is extremely grateful to the Oshkosh Corporation for their generous donation of $30,000 to be used for the Go Transit Partnership funding. This partnership allows Oshkosh kindergarten through 12th grade students to ride city buses to school at no charge. We appreciate the company's generosity and willingness to partner for the benefit of Oshkosh's students. At this time, I would like to share a final reminder about the mid-year transition period for E-Academy. The deadline to enroll or unenroll in E-Academy for the second semester of this school year is this Friday, December the 4th at 3 p.m. And I want to make a clarification on that. I apologize. It's not Friday. This would actually be, December 4th would be, oh, that's Friday. I'm thinking today's the 3rd. My apologies. Families are advised to read the many resources available on the E-Academy website to understand what a change would mean for your family. And then lastly, please keep in mind that we did have Thanksgiving break. So just from our last board meeting until today, on the screen you'll see just a few examples of where I've been spending my time lately. So as it has been frequently just a lot of different meetings and a lot of school meetings as well, and have an opportunity to interact with our school administrators as well as with our school instructional staff. So very appreciative of that time. And at this time, I would like to transition us into our district administrator's supplemental reports. Mr. Kamer, if you'll please come up to provide us an update with COVID-19.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
So as many of you know, each week or each board meeting, I go over the current status of COVID-19 in the district, and it's largely based on the Winnebago County Health Department report that comes out on a weekly basis. And that report covers the previous 14 days. So the report that I'm going to be covering today looks at the dates of November 11th through November 24th. That report comes out every Thursday, so there's another report that will be coming out tomorrow, and that's always available on the Winnebago County Health Department website for those who are interested. So based on their data summary for the past 2-week period, the burden rate for the geographical boundary area of the Oshkosh Area School District was at 1,032.2, and that placed us in the critically high range in terms of the burden status. So, and just as a reminder, when we talk about burden status, anything that's over 1,000 is considered critically high. Anything between 350 and 1,000 is considered very high. Anything between 100 and 350 is in the high category, and when you get below 100, there's a moderately high category, a moderate category, and a low category. So we've been in the critically high category for a few weeks now. On this most recent report, the Oshkosh Area School District boundary was the only district boundary in our county that remained in that critically high category. Most other districts, I should say all the other districts in the county, are now in the very high category. So hopefully that's a trend that we see very soon here as well. One of the things that we do is we break down the burden status by grade level. So we look at elementary, middle, and high school, and it's based on students who attend the Oshkosh Area School District. So when that's broken down more specifically, for the past 2-week period, our elementary and middle school students were both considered to be in the very high category, while our high school students were considered to be in the critically high category. So in looking at some of the other information included in the report, and that has come out in the past week related to COVID-19 in our state and region, hospitalization rates remain at dangerously high levels, and that's across the state. That's not just our area. One of the things that the health department was very straightforward about in this most recent report is there was the expectation that the case numbers, or the positive case numbers, were going to drop early this week. And their prediction has been something that has come true. I mean, they attributed that to the fact that testing capacity over the holiday weekend was going to be greatly reduced. So while the numbers to start this week were a little bit lower than expected, if you've been following the daily reports that come out, those numbers have been gradually increasing to what we saw prior to the Thanksgiving break. So there are many out there, many health professionals that are predicting that there could be potentially a surge following holiday get-togethers, and that's something we're going to have to wait to see if that is the case in our area or not. Another piece, just as a reminder, in terms of testing for district staff members, their family members, and even students, there is testing available through the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. They have what's called antigen testing. So if you go in, you have to sign up first. If you go in and get tested, you can get the results back in as little as 15 minutes. They also have a PCR option, which is the laboratory confirmed testing. And individuals who have symptoms who go in to get tested usually have a follow-up with that PCR test as well. Or if they test positive on an antigen test, it'll be recommended that they come back and do the PCR test. So within the board report, I have the link for staff to sign up there. And then as another reminder, we have our Oshkosh Area School District COVID-19 dashboard that's updated several times each week. And that just lays out the number of current positive cases and active quarantines that we have among our students and staff. But then it also lists the cumulative total of cases that we've had since the start of the school year across the board. One piece of information that I've been getting asked a lot about today, and this is actually information that came out today from the CDC, is they're changing their guidance as it relates to quarantine timelines for individuals who are identified as close contacts. So based on the new guidelines from the CDC, individuals who are a close contact but are not experiencing symptoms after 10 days could end their quarantine. In addition to that, individuals who are not demonstrating symptoms and get a negative test result could potentially end their quarantine after 7 days. Now, we're waiting on the health department. They're currently working with the Wisconsin Department of Health Services to come out with recommendations for school districts in Wisconsin on whether or not to move forward with that guidance. So for the time being, we're going to hold tight with what we currently use, the previous recommendations for quarantine timelines, which was 14 days for close contact. So until we hear from the health department, we're gonna stick with that going forward. So that concludes my report.
Mr. Kamer, just a clarification. I know that we also received some additional information from the Department of Health today related to the numbers that are being presented this week.
Yes, yep. So I did mention that because of the Thanksgiving holiday, there were fewer testing centers open, fewer people accessing testing. So the number of positive cases to start this week has been depressed a bit. But like I said, the numbers have been gradually increasing since earlier in the week.
And Matt, on the health department's weekly reports, they have the biweekly confirmed cases. For instance, like 11/11 and 11/24, under 5, 9. That's 9 positive cases in our school district, right?
So the numbers that, are you talking about the number for case or for
Case counts for select age groups.
for age groups? So if you remember a few weeks ago, we had talked about how that might not be an accurate representation for our school district, specifically because some of the students that are included in those numbers are students who attend private schools or who may be homeschooled or be attending school virtually. So we actually have been calculating our own burden status based on the number of students who attend the Oshkosh Area School District that have tested positive. So, but in that report, it refers to students who are within those age groups who live within the Oshkosh Area School District geographical boundary who test positive. So they may or may not actually be enrolled in the district.
And the one that you were talking about that's just Oshkosh School District is on our district website.
Yep,
dashboard.
those are the cases that we've been using, that we've actually calculated those out ourselves to have a more accurate representation.
Are there other questions or comments for Mr. Kemmer? All right. Well, thank you very much for your report.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna leave these up here and sanitize a bit between our speakers.
First, I thought you were bringing a package of cookies.
Oh, I wish.
And for the board, does it please the board, in order to have a verbal on the remaining 2 items, the school emergency management report? I know that you had received a briefing of that at the last board meeting, and then also the PC workstation replacement. I know that Dr. Gunlock had provided some preliminary information on that previously. Does the board want to have a verbal on this as well?
I think it's good for us and the public to refresh our memories on these things, if the rest of the board is okay with that.
Certainly. Dr. Jones? Dr. Paquette? I had a written report related to the school emergency management report. The board would like just a high-level overview of that, please.
I'm going to turn it over to our EPCOT leader, Sarah.
Dr. Paquette.
Good
Dr.
evening. I'm here tonight to present a real brief update. As you have received previous materials, we have rewritten our school safety plan. It was a little bit dated, so we used upcoming procedures from FEMA and emergency management to make sure we're following best practices. Obviously, we're not going to disclose or share too much because we want to keep those protocols safe, because student safety is a high priority. So you had an opportunity to look through the plan. And again, this is something that we submit due to Act 143, which I talked about last month, which was required from 2017. So that's where we are at this evening.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Dr. Paquette or Dr. Jones?
No, thank you. It's very detailed and it's a great team. Thank you for taking it over for Dr. Jones.
And that
Another
actually
doctor.
has been a
The other
great
one.
team approach. We have a lot of other administrators on our EPCOT team. We also had Roxanne Casperson, who helped collate a lot of these materials, so she should be given credit. But Ryan Peterson, Kristen Berger, Beth Galiazzi, we also have Jackie Kiffmeyer, all part of this plan and the process, so they should get credit as well too.
Thank you, Dr. Paquette.
Very good. Thank you very much for your report.
Thank you.
And then our last item is related to a PC workstation replacement. Dr. Gunlock.
Thank you. My report is less lengthy than the previous one because it's a little bit more cut and dried at this point. We went to RFP for PC workstations. We're purchasing about 735 PC workstations. They're about 5 years old, so they're end of life, so we're replacing those. They're primarily found in clerical areas, computer labs, that we still do have computer labs in certain locations that require them, and media centers. That's down. If you've been following along over the past several years, we're down a bit in PC workstations because we've replaced all the classroom computers, which would normally be Windows PCs, with Chromeboxes. Those are bolted on the back of their interactive whiteboards, so they're quicker to turn on and off, and they're easier to update, lower cost, a little bit more robust. Basically turns each classroom into a large Chromebook, touchscreen Chromebook. So we are recommending the award, and obviously the resolution will come in 2 more weeks, for PDS. They were the low bidder by about $20,000. So, any questions?
Questions or comments for Dr. Gundlach? It's good to be innovative and forward-thinking on these things, so thank you, Dr. Gundlach, and your team.
Hoping these were cookies myself.
All right, then we'll move on to other reports. I think we have at least one committee report this evening. Do you have a report? Is that you, Mr. Evans, the legislative committee report?
Yes, I have one. The legislative committee met on Thursday, November 19th. First thing that we always do is we kind of go through a little legislative update, and the main part of that was the election that happened a couple weeks prior. We talked about the leadership that at the state level that they put in place. This was all the same as the last 2 years. Talked about Governor Evers' mask mandate going to the Supreme Court, and they shall be deciding on that in a couple of weeks. Then we talked about different things that might be happening to, as for instance, bringing back retirees to discussion of this particular school year, 3-year averaging. That's not what the first part. The first part is bringing back retired teachers for substituting. My mask is getting in my mouth. Then we talked about the city and the school board bus agreement, and then we went over and kind of fine-tuned the things that we did at our workshop for the legislative committee, which we're also going to be talking about tonight. So that would be the end of my. We meet again on December 17th, and I apologize for my little stumbling in the middle of that report, but that would be it.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Is there anyone else who had a report tonight? I know there's a committee tomorrow that's meeting, the education committee, so Mrs. Szilagyi will likely have a report for us at our meeting in 2 weeks. Very good. With that, we will move on to the non-agenda related public forum. We have quite a number of a larger number of individuals than we normally have for this meeting. So again, I would reiterate that we have a 3-minute time limit, so please try to adhere to that in respect to the other presenters tonight. Our guidelines for public comment read like this. Please clearly state your name and address. If you're acting as a spokesperson for a particular group of individuals, we ask that you indicate the group that you represent. Again, we ask that you limit your comments to the time allotted, which is 3 minutes. We ask you to use public comments rather than a question and answer dialogue. State clearly and concisely the matters of concern. Please remember that the use of specific names of district personnel may lead to legal liability. In such instances, please pursue the district's formal complaint process by contacting the superintendent's office at 424-0160 to direct you to the appropriate administrator. Thank you. With that, we will begin with our first person, and that is Gregegner.
Hey, Gregegner, 911 Greenwood Court. I dialed up the Fox Valley Association website yesterday, and I noticed that we're not allowing spectators at games. It was on the cover of the website, and as a number of you know, I officiate volleyball and softball, and I did some games this year, and there are spectators at these games, and they're following WIAA protocol. They're, keeping social distance and wearing masks, and I, as an official, have to wear a mask also. And it's tough with a whistle, but something you just got to adjust to, I would like, if possible, to rethink this, because if I were a parent, of course, I'm not in that situation, but if I were a parent, I would want to see my kid play. And just me as a average taxpayer, I would like to, if I want to go to a game, I would like to see the kids play, because I'm interested in Oshkosh kids. So, I really think that we can do this. I hear all the time, we are Oshkosh, and I think we are, and I think we can definitely, put the rules in place for that we can get spectators at games. I really think that it would be advantageous for us to do that. So if you could rethink that, that would be really terrific, and we are Oshkosh. I think we can do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Egner.
Thank you.
Next is Megan Casper.
Megan Casper, 3024 Holly Court. I have made the request for a public meeting on several occasions, both verbally and in writing, to have a conversation regarding the current situation. The board has deferred me to the administration, citing they are responsible for the model, which, as I indicated in my email, was confusing since at the last board meeting, the board cited the joint venture nature of decision-making between the board and the administration. So I got confused. The administration is unwilling to meet in person and is insisting on a Zoom meeting, which is disappointing and unacceptable. We continue to request an in-person public meeting in the evening and don't believe there's any reason this can't and shouldn't be granted. We are meeting here in person and have been for a number of weeks. As it pertains to the questions, we have been providing the questions all along when we come and speak to you at these meetings. If you have not been paying attention, I find this as a bit of an insult. Our questions surround what our district is doing to get our children back to in-person learning. If you need to prepare for those questions, I'd like to know what exactly you have been doing for the last nearly 9 months. We don't want to hear about what is stopping us anymore. By not holding a meeting per our request, both the board and the administration are giving the impression of hiding behind each other or computer screens, and all of it continues to reinforce the lack of trust, confidence, accountability, and integrity in the district and its leadership. At the highest level, the administration is responsible to the board, and the board is responsible to the taxpayers. This seems to have gotten lost somewhere in the decision-making matrix, as over 80% of parents wanted their children in the classroom per the survey you delivered in the fall or spring, or in the summer. No other businesses get to operate the way you are operating right now. They would be out of business and bankrupt. It always strikes me as odd how government-funded operations seem to play by their own rules with money that isn't even their own. Seems very careless. The CDC director, Dr. Robert Redfield, just recently announced at a White House coronavirus task force briefing that schools should not be closed. He confirmed that K-12 schools can operate with face-to-face learning safely and effectively. Cases in the schools are not acquired in the schools, which is evidenced in our community by the fact that we have not been in school for nearly 8 weeks, and yet the cases have surged. At no point in the pandemic, even in the spring, has the CDC recommended closing schools. He also commented that masks, social distancing, and hand washing all work. The data strongly support that K-12 and even institutions of higher education are not where the challenges lie, and closing schools is counterproductive. I don't understand how we can ignore this and continue to defer our county health department, who has no medical expertise on their staff. I'll follow up in an email again for my meeting request.
Thank you, Mrs. Casper.
Thank you.
Next is Fallon Crow. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
While we understand that COVID has obviously created obstacles in education.
Excuse me, I apologize. Yep. You need to state your name and your address, please.
Fallon Crow, 73 Wildberry Lane.
Thank you.
While we understand that COVID has obviously created obstacles in education, it should not jeopardize our students' futures. After talking with many parents, teachers, and students in Oshkosh Area School District, it is evident that our students need to be back into the classroom to foster their learning and continue to seek identity. Identity is who we are and what we do. A large part of a child's identity is being a student. This identity is fostered by relationships, social interactions, successes, and even failures. School is an avenue for which children develop their identity. By not allowing our children to return to school, we are creating a culture of individuals with fractured identities. We ask that you seriously consider the information being presented to you, especially for those directly affected, teachers, students, and parents. Teachers that we have talked with are teachers that have vested interest as both educators and parents of the students in the district. They have requested to remain anonymous to ensure equitable treatment by their peers and leaders. Here are two teachers' views on why OASD must get our students back in school. Number one, as an educator, we are trained to always evaluate data. We examine data multiple times a day to make decisions about what is best for the kids sitting in our classrooms. If when we look at the data, the results don't match our intended outcome, we evaluate our instruction and make changes to best meet the needs of our students. As a district, we are failing to look at the data and matrices in a way that supports the whole child. We are failing our students. As an educator, parent, taxpayer, and stakeholder in the city of Oshkosh, we need to better for our community, specifically the kids of this district. Medical professionals have spoken to the board in support of our children's returning to school full-time. You need to listen. We are failing to look at the whole child and the long-term effects of being out of the school building for almost 9 months. As an educator, I am advocating for students to return to the building full-time for semester 2. Number 2, schools provide more than just academics to our children. Schools provide children with a chance to learn social and emotional skills, get exercise, and have access to mental health support and other services that cannot be provided with online
30
learning.
seconds, please.
Students are more connected and engaged when they are physically present in a classroom. Teachers can best do their jobs when physically present in a classroom. The school day provides structure and routine for our students that are lacking
15
on
seconds,
online
please.
learning. Schools will not be the driving force for the spread of this virus, but schools will be the driving force for the future of our children. Please allow me to provide the instruction to best meet my students' needs, and that is in the classroom. Please put our students back into the schools that the wonderful teachers of the Oshkosh Area School District can continue to provide.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is Mila Crow, Mila Crow.
Crow, 73 Wildberry Lane.
Thank you.
I am a Carl Traeger 6th grade student. My biggest question is, why are we not in school, but all these other schools nearby are in full time? When I think to the future, I feel and know that the kids in school today are going to be much, much smarter than the ones that were virtual. In our meetings, less than half of the class is participating with their camera on, and when they get asked a question by the teacher, only a few respond. But how would you know that? Because you never been to one of our meetings. One of my teachers had to resign because she had to teach and help out with her own family. I quote her, "We are greatly struggling to find a balance that works for our family, that meets the needs of our own young children at home." She also said it is one of the toughest decisions she has had to make. I know they are not the only family that is struggling with this. For example, my mom had to adjust her work schedule to be home more. It is estimated that about 2.2 million women have left the workforce since the pandemic began. Moms have been forced to choose between a career and a child care. I am now having to get my 3-year-old sister ready for school, a child care center that has managed to stay open since March. My literacy teacher recently asked a question about how motivated we feel during online school. More than half of the students said medium. I was one of the students that chose medium because since online school, I have gotten less and less motivated. I'm still doing everything I'm told to do. I still do all my assignments and I attend all my classes, but I have just been moping around and not wanting to do anything, and I know I'm not the only one. I wake up and do the same thing every day, nothing to wake up for and no motivation. I'm hoping that you will all consider my thoughts and feelings and come up with a solution to get students back into school. Thank you.
Thank you for coming, Myla. Next is Elena Noe. I just need your name and address, please.
Elena Noe, 1917 Timberline Drive.
Thank you.
My name is Eliana, and I'm currently in 8th grade at Carl Traeger Middle School. Next year, I'm supposed to go to high school. I'm scared. The 8th grade year is supposed to be a transition year, preparing us for high school. I am not prepared. I'm 13 years old, and I'm spending my days simply getting my work done to turn it in. I'm hoping I know what day of the week it is so I can try to log on to the correct classes. Do you know what middle schoolers are getting really good at? Laying in bed all day and watching Netflix, because we have too much time to do it. We don't have structure or guidance as we sit at home. Let's be honest, most of our parents work outside of the home. They aren't watching us. My social circle these days are my parents and my little brother. That isn't fun. I miss my friends and I miss my teachers. I'm supposed to attend 13 years of schooling if we count kindergarten, before college. So far, I have lost at least 1 year of instruction, very possibly a year and a half. That is 11% of my education. Since I was very little, I was always taught the importance of going to school by my parents and teachers. Is that not important anymore? A student is considered truant after 10 missed days of school. At this point, we are all truant, aren't we? We are just getting things done. We aren't learning anything. In school, we learn to first of all try. Second of all, we learn to try again. It seems to me like someone forgot to try and try again. Try to get us back in school and then try again. Do it differently. My cousins in Cedarburg are in school 5 days a week since the very beginning. Yes, they took a short break around the holidays. That was smart, but their schools understand the difference in quality between learning in person and learning through video chat. Their goal was always to teach 5 days a week in person. What was your goal? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is Sarah Noe. Sarah Noe, 1917 Timberline Drive. I am a parent of an elementary student and a middle schooler. This year has been rough, and for some, more rough than others. A lot has been canceled, but do you understand how your decisions have affected our children's future, their well-being, their mental health? Or how you've even canceled students' chances at graduating high school? How do you feel about that, knowing that some kids will never graduate high school because of your decisions? That many kids will no longer understand the importance of school because you didn't? A year from now, how am I going to drag my daughter out of her bed in the morning to go to high school, when this year being in school wasn't important enough to you? It seemed from the beginning this administration's goal was to not be in school. The virtual learning was the prime target for this entire year. You sent out a last-minute survey, and even though you tried your hardest to write the questions to skew the results, overwhelmingly, we chose in-person schooling. So what was the point of the survey? You offered e-academy for families who are less comfortable with having children in person. I ask you, where is the option of a 5-day-a-week in-person school for us, the families who know that in-person is best for their children? Please tell me how area schools are in person 5 days a week, and yet Oshkosh schools, which are in the same county, under the same health department, were essentially 100% virtual. Please tell me how Amarillo, Winneconne, Berlin, and private schools can figure it out. You know Berlin, right, Dr. Cartwright? Your husband's a superintendent there, and they are in person 5 days a week. And you know why? They listen to their families, and their families wouldn't stand for it. Meanwhile, we, the parents of Oshkosh area school children, are being ignored.
What happens when an Oshkosh student is competing with a Winneconne educated student for college entrance or a job? The Oshkosh student lost a year of education. It is obvious there is a lack of leadership occurring in the school district. There is little to no communication to families, teachers, and staff, and the communication that does come through is untruthful. What superintendent sends out an email about a rumor going around the school?
Excuse me,
Yeah.
you're not allowed to
Okay.
address names of
Okay.
individuals or
Okay.
titles of individuals.
What school district sends out an email about a rumor going around the school that it's going to be shut down, days before it actually shuts down? What school district sends out a message of sincerity to families when they realize that from the outside looking in,
You have 15 seconds.
the change to hybrid on Election Day was made as a Hail Mary pass to get that referendum to pass? There is zero trust in the leadership of Oshkosh area school districts. I don't know who that includes, but I most certainly know it includes the author of those letters to our families.
Your time is up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Once again, I would remind speakers that the use of specific district names of personnel or titles is not allowed and may lead to legal liability. Next is Stacy Potter.
Need to state my address?
Yes, please.
Okay. 3754 Leonard Point Road. I share the same sense of urgency and desire as the other parents you're going to hear tonight about getting our kids back in school full time. However, I'm going to use my 3 minutes to share some messages that I've been hearing from teachers, district staff, principals, community members instead, and address the overwhelming concern about the lack of leadership in the school district. So without naming names, it's obvious who I'm referring to. Biggest concerns being that I fear that very talented teachers, administrators in the district will leave, have left already, based on the fact that there is a huge lack of trust and confidence in what's happening at district leadership. I also have heard of teachers and staff fearing retribution if any sort of feedback, input that's not pleasing to district leadership has been offered. That's obviously a problem, and if the board hasn't been aware of that before now, I hope you now stand informed. Lack of clear, well-planned protocols for COVID and how we're going to get our kids back in school. We've covered that a bunch. I'm concerned about the unwillingness of the board, and specifically, oops, I can't say that, sorry. Unwillingness of the board to evaluate, coach, and supersede in district things when it comes to leadership. And I'm concerned about an unwillingness to engage in unscripted conversations with community members as evidenced by the refusal to meet with us. We have questions. We would much prefer a dialogue where questions can be asked and answered, and it's not just us pointing fingers. That doesn't seem like a very great way to get business done and to have good community buy-in. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Next is Molly Boots.
Molly Boots, 3880 Crab Apple Lane. Leaders help themselves and others do the right thing. They set direction, build an inspiring vision, and create something new. Leadership is mapping out where you need to go to win as a team or an organization, and in this case, as a community. We have chosen you to be our leaders, to map out how our community and children will win through these challenging times. However, as parents in a community, we feel as though our leadership has failed us and none of us are winning, especially our children. Many of us who chose Oshkosh for the same reasons, particularly those of us who are not from here, we chose Oshkosh because of its quality schools and education. We decided to lay our roots here, invest in this community, and raise our families here because this district promised us opportunities for our children to reach their full potential, and this district said it builds community through education. Yet in our area, we are still the only district that continues to find reasons to keep our kids out of the classroom, limiting any opportunities that school promises. In conversations with other district administrators, their school board members, and their staff members, I have gathered the following direct quotes. Number one, Oshkosh is using its size as a disadvantage when it should be its advantage. Number two, your district is finding every excuse not to be in school rather than finding solutions to be in school. Number three, the philosophy of your district administration and board is not about the kids being in school. Their philosophy is all about online and virtual learning. And number four, it's easier for them to be out of school. They're not even trying. I ask you, board administration and board, to go back to the promises you made our community, to be the leaders in education while supporting the whole child, to enrich our community by supporting our students to lead creative and empowered lives, and to put students first. Soon, our students will be home for almost an entire year. They will have had an entire year of broken promises by a school district that so many of us moved here to be a part of. My children and all children have missed lifelong experiences. They've missed lifelong opportunities, lifelong friendships and relationships, lifelong connections that they will never get back. Imagine yourself as a child being denied the opportunity for your first holiday concert as a kindergartner, your first middle school cross-country meet, your first 7th grade basketball or volleyball game, your first high school football game, your first school musical, and your high school graduation. These are all opportunities our friends and neighbors in other districts enjoyed over the past year, while our families who chose Oshkosh lost out on. Memories our children will never have and moments they will never get back. Let's go back to putting students first.
Thank you.
Your community is counting on you.
Thank you. Thank you. Corey Patrick.
Corey Patrick, 1285 Old Apple Lane. It was mentioned in a past board meeting and among other platforms that the size of our school district cannot withstand the demands of being in school full-time with students, staff, and others, including bus drivers, during this pandemic. It was also stated that this simply cannot be done and that comparing our district with others in the area is not a fair comparison. I respectfully disagree. We compare our school district to other districts when it comes to student success, course offerings, sports, and most recently, you compared the funding of Oshkosh Area School District to other school districts across the state, noting that ours was underfunded compared to school districts of our size. Shouldn't our size and human resources give us more opportunity for innovation and ideas? We know that there have been suggestions from the public on ideas such as utilizing space in the community to spread out the classrooms. Don't the YMCA Boys and Girls Club, among various other community kid places, already host kids for activities? If the size of the Oshkosh Area School District is an excuse not to be in school, let me suggest that our size is also a reason to be in school. I would make the suggestion using the following questions that are often never asked or often left unanswered. How is the district monitoring students? Where is your data that show that all students, in your words, are quote-unquote safe? What exactly is your definition of safe? Safe from what? Safe from whom? Where is your data that all students are being properly monitored as they navigate virtual learning? How are you monitoring the social and mental health needs of students, those with specific needs as well as those that are not obvious and only come to light when staff in our schools identify these needs on a daily basis with face-to-face contact? What about educational progress? How do teachers know for sure that a student has truly mastered the required subject matter at their level? What happens when a student doesn't learn the concept correctly, or worse, what happens when they are cheating? These are imperative questions that I think should be highly considered. Now let's talk about the word safe. I would agree that we need to keep our children safe and help them thrive in all areas of life. However, the current school board policy as instituted by this administration looks only at one data point and does not consider the holistic health of the child learner. We need to start looking at our children and students not merely as data points, but as people, and to consider what is in the holistic health of that child. As a parent and one who is willing to fight for those without a voice or whose voice is being squelched, I say that from the parents and community that I belong to, it is in the best interest of our children's long-term holistic health for them to be back in school. To be clear, I'm requesting a 5-day-a-week in-person learning for semester 2,
15 seconds,
with, of
please.
course, all COVID precautions that were already in place. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Willa Bell.
Willa Bell, 3798 Leonard Point Road. Tonight I'm here on behalf of my family. I'm here on behalf of my kids. I have a high school student and I also have a middle school student. I find it ironic that my daughter is currently at basketball practice, which she has been for the last 2 weeks through her high school team, but yet is not in school. Something I'm not really understanding why that's okay. But she is thrilled to be at basketball. And, you know, I'm here to support in-person learning returning as soon as humanly possible. You know, I will take 5 days a week, I will take 3 days a week, I will take 2 days a week, I will take any return whatsoever. You know, this virtual learning, the teachers have worked super, super hard to make it happen. Every one of my kids' teachers, I want to thank personally because they've done a great job of putting something together that is going to work better than the spring had, so I'm very appreciative of that. But it's definitely not the same as my kids going to school. It's not just the learning, it's the experiences that these young adults are having and not having at this point, and just their whole social support and part of their world and environment has been taken away. You know, I understand because I'm also a physician and my husband is a physician with concern of spread and what the cases are like and safety and people worried about getting ill and sick. And I want to say that I get it. And back in March, our hospital pretty much shut down and we weren't doing a whole lot of anything because we didn't really know what was happening or what COVID was. But over months and then over the summer and now into the fall, I mean, there's just so much more information and there's safety precautions that actually do work. So I cannot do my practice as a doctor virtually at all. So I go into an exam room with patients every single day, multiple days a week, and I wear a combination that is gonna work. Usually it's this one, I have that. I have an N95 if I'm overly concerned, just depending on the risk that I feel. And these things work, hand washing works. You know, I'm not 6 feet apart from a patient, I'm much closer than that. And there hasn't been spread of staff or patients or doctors. You know, we all are doing our best to make everything happen and make our work happen. And that's what I need the school district to do. You know, you have plenty of things in place, plenty of safety measures. So I want in-person learning to return. And a final statement that I will say is that our hospital, our staff, we got this massive email on resources for suicides in this community. So there's a lot of mental health problems happening with young people, families. So you need to know that. And I need you to think through what your actions and what your decisions are because it's making a difference adversely on other things. So please do your best to return to in-person learning. Thank you
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Anita Rigoni.
Hello, my name is Anita Rigoni. I live at 4556 Bellhaven Lane. The topic I would like to discuss today is the return to in-school learning. First of all, I want to thank all of you for the job that you've done for us. I know that this has been hard. I know it's taken a lot of perseverance through trying times for all of us. And we've been challenged by a lot of difficult decisions with, at first, very little information. But I think with any infectious process that the depth of information we have increases over time and we need to use that information to guide our decisions. As a physician, I'm reminded of a famous quote that when the facts change, I have to change my mind. And this could not be more true than in the current COVID pandemic. The current metrics that we are using to make our decisions were based on past data and speculation of potential risk of spread in schools, but the latest data have failed to provide sufficient or compelling evidence that in-person learning leads to significant or meaningful increases in the community infection rates. There is no evidence that the spread in schools occurs when proper mitigation strategies are applied. And I'm sure that you've all heard the recent CDC Director Robert Redfield, his quote, "There is extensive data that we have gathered over the last 2 to 3 months to confirm that K through 12 schools can operate with face-to-face learning, and they can do this safely, they can do it responsibly." Further echoed by Dr. Fauci, "The default position should be to try as best as possible to keep the children in school, to get them back in school. If you look at the data, the spread among children and from children is not very big at all, not like one would have expected. So let's get the kids back." As decision makers, you are now faced with the same question: when and how to return our children to the classroom. But now we have more information to guide our decisions. And as decision makers, we should be prepared to pivot when the facts change. Our request to you, our elected school board leaders, is to make educated, fact-driven decisions that are unbiased and not driven by fear or politics, to listen to the more than 80% of parents who have voiced their opinions to have their children return to the classroom. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And next we will hear from Sophia Rigoni.
Hi, my name is Sophia Rigoni, and I live on 4556 Bellhaven Lane. I'm here to talk about virtual learning. I'm an 8th grader here in our district at Traeger Middle School. I came here to talk to you again because it's getting worse and worse for me. I'm continuously falling behind, and if I'm being honest, I'm looking up my answers. I'm giving up. I can't do virtual learning anymore. It's too hard on my mental health, and I became numb during the day trying to do my work. I just give up, and I'm on my computer for 7 hours a day. Usually I fall asleep. I now have tutors because I struggle with working by myself. You say you want us to go back, but you obviously aren't trying hard enough and looking around. Many surrounding schools are at school. Why can't we? Even Dr. Fossey said, and I quote, "Close the bars and open schools." We should be in school. Kids aren't the only ones dying from the virus. Aren't the ones dying from the virus. The kids and families that are high risk can stay home, but not everyone. We need to stop being so scared of the virus as a district. Kids are hurting, and we need to go back. We are never going to go back if we just continue to wait for a vaccination, because who knows how long that will be. This isn't okay. Even a lot of my teachers really want to go back to school and are very upset. I don't have any facts with me, but I can say that I'm deeply struggling and can't do this anymore. I'm tired of getting lied to. We will go back in 2 weeks, they say. Now, months later, we're still at home. They even said recently we were going back, and I was so happy. I even started picking out outfits for school, and I was excited to see my friends again. But last minute, 2 days before, my heart was broken because they said that we weren't going back. No one likes this. And suicide rates are going up as well, all over the country. And we can't let the Oshkosh be the next victim. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. Next is Nikki Words.
Hi, my name is Nikki Wendt. I live at 407 West 11th Avenue. I have 2 high school sons. One's a senior and one's a freshman. And I guess I came because I wanted to hear more about what was going on. I want to trust our health department. I want to trust our school district. I believed wholeheartedly in closing the schools during the spring because I agreed we had a contagion and we were concerned about the health and well-being of our students and our teachers. Our teachers are wonderful, and they've tried their best to help my kids, and I appreciate everything they've done for us. What I have a concern about is I can't understand how the community is okay with non-essential businesses being open and our schools being closed.
I can't believe that there is an outrage that there are bars and restaurants full-blown open and rolling, but my kids are staying home from school and missing their senior year of high school. And it just blows my mind that there isn't more talk between the health department and the school district, the community, and all of those organizations saying, what in the world are you guys thinking? So I have a problem with that. I'd like to see our kids go back to school as soon as possible. It bothers me that the other school districts are somehow making it work, that they're back to school in some form, whether it's daily or whether it's a couple days a week, but we're closed. I wish I could understand that. I don't understand the decision-making here. I wish I could understand the data and the metrics used to make those decisions. I've tried and I just don't get it. But I want to trust that they're doing the right thing because I want my kids to be safe and I want my teachers to be okay. So I guess I'd like to see our schools go back to in-person learning as soon as safe and as soon as we can agree that we can make sure that everything is done to keep everyone in the district rolling. So I would hope that the community would think about this a little bit harder. How are we having in-person bars and restaurants but no school? I'd like to ask a little bit more about how we have sports but no in-person school. I have 2 hockey players and somehow they're playing hockey but they're not in school. Something interesting about that, there are no spectators. I agree with you and about what you had to say about how we can't have spectators. That's part of the revenue that we use to help afford hockey. So it would be really nice if we could have spectators, and I'd like to see my freshman and my senior play together the only time that they ever will have in their entire life.
30 seconds, please.
And I think we can do it safely. And then the last thing, I guess, I have a kind of a disorganized list of things I was concerned about. But Canvas, I was hoping that within virtual learning that Canvas could have been used a little bit more consistently across the board. I was hoping that there would be better consistent use of it by the teachers so that kids could have like an idea of really what they were doing. It doesn't seem to be used the same way by each teacher. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. And our last person, last but not least, is Sonia Messenger.
Hi there, Sonia Messenger, 1814 Iowa Street. I'd like to begin by thanking the vast majority of staff members at the OASD, the teachers, principals, and other professionals that have done what they can to make this pandemic bearable for these children. It is completely understood that this job and this situation are incredibly difficult to maneuver. I can appreciate the very large burden that you all are carrying on your shoulders. That being said, I want to address the issue of accountability. Accountability for the lack of communication by this board. It is a simple concept that has been completely overlooked by the heads of the OASD. You ask that families adjust their schedules, employment, and income to suit the rapidly changing education provided by the city to their children on a moment's notice without compassion or understanding for the predicaments that you've placed them in. I ask you how you might feel if the roles were reversed. Would you find yourselves frustrated at the lack of communication and accountability? How would you rectify losing your income and watching the emotional stability of the household you provide for slip into a depression simply because you trusted a system to communicate with you and they chose not to? I've attended virtual meetings and watched children tell their teachers information that should have been relayed to the staff before their students. These children are experiencing repeated meltdowns and disappointment in a matter of seconds because they were not informed of the changes to their education in a manner that was appropriate to a small human. How is it that a student is required to attend upwards of 6 virtual meetings in one day's time, as well as homework and extracurricular activities like art and music, but the adults that are paid to educate them and care for them have chosen to remain silent until it's beneficial to them? The parents in this community are asking the board of the OASD to communicate. This request is not a difficult one to fulfill. It has not gone unnoticed that the information provided on the OASD website is not corresponding with the decisions being made on behalf of our children. We would like to be informed of all the decisions that are made by the board as soon as they are made and not when it is convenient for you. The ongoing issue of communication began in March of this year and has continued in a downward spiral. I have personally struggled to contact the members of this board for information. It was not until I suggested via a phone conversation with the secretary in August of this year that I email every staff member every 5 minutes until I receive a response. It took so drastic an action to get a simple result. The OASD board has refused to answer any further questions that directly impact our children's lives. We ask that we be given more than 3 minutes at a time to express the full magnitude of our current situation and that we receive a real resolution to these concerns. If that request cannot be met, we will be forced to take action. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that ends the non-agenda related public forum. There was no one who signed up for the agenda related public forum today, so we will move on to a workshop. We have a workshop scheduled on legislative platform.
Thank you, Board. Take the phone. All right, so tonight, what we're going to do is just do a brief overview of the conversation that we had from our last workshop about a month ago related to this information. From there, what you are going to notate is that there are some color codings that are associated with this, and so I want to make sure that everyone is aware of what those color codings are. Once we get to that, I'll be sure to make sure that you are aware of the purpose behind those. When we started last time, we spoke about what our vision and mission and value statements were, and just reminding us to keep our focus on what our priorities are within the district. We spoke about the process, and the process that we chose to participate in before was creating an objective, defining our state platforms, and then that is where we concluded the last workshop. And then tonight we're going to be defining the 2020-2021 priorities. In defining an objective, the thing that we wanted to ensure was making sure that it provided a general overview about what the desires of the board are as far as advocating. And in that, we went through and we created a list, and you provided us with a whole bunch of like one-word phrases and such as that. That's the next slide. So the things that we spoke about that evening were funding, mental health student services, accountability of funding sources, how well are students doing who are utilized for open enrollment or private vouchers. Making sure we kept a focus on the whole child, looking at the equitable access to resources and funding, making sure that we remembered that we're focusing on all students, to remove extraneous barriers and red tape, process, procedures in order to go streamlining. We were definitely looking at local control, services for students in need, and this included student services and funding, looking at equitable budget practices, assist with recruiting strategies to diversify districts, which lies with innovation, looking at school safety and what does that budget look like in order to provide that safe environment. And then innovation, the incorporation of arts into the school, creative methods of instruction. So these were the high level as far as what were the things that we wanted to really focus on as to what the objective was. From that, we quickly transitioned into the main areas that you would like to focus, regardless of what proposals may be on the legislative floor or being discussed. So these are basically larger areas that will stand over time, as you might say. So it's not just for this current school year, but it may be for the next few school years, 2 to 3 school years. But this is also something that can be revised on an annual basis if needed. The areas that were listed were accountability, next slide, funding, the infusion of arts into school programming, our student services, specifically with students in need, school safety, our mental health. We wanted to focus in on personnel, staff pay, recruitment and retention, and then facilities as well. From that, once we listed those areas, then it was getting into really starting to flush those out, and that could be used in order. We fleshed those out in order to write our principles. So within the area of accountability, on the next slide, it was very specifically highlighted and focused in on the private school voucher program, and there were 4 areas that were identified from here. And I think these areas are, I think as we get into further conversation later tonight, it's going to be important to really pay attention to these principles, because this is where we're going to be selecting from in order to find out what platform you would like to really focus in on for this year. So under accountability, student, and I apologize for reading to you, but it's for the benefit of everyone. But students attending private schools through public funding must participate in assessment requirements that students in public schools must take. The amount of dollars being assessed on property taxes for private school vouchers is listed on the property tax bill, so that way the average person can identify what it is. The transparency of a verification process by allowing school districts to validate that students using the private school voucher are within the school district's boundaries on an annual basis. Verify on an annual basis eligibility requirements for the private school voucher program as well. Then we got into a different area of funding. Within funding, it stated, create a funding system that allows for equitable spending per student across the entire state. So you had conversation to where it shouldn't matter where a student lives and what district they attend, that the funding, you should at least have a flat base rate for students across the entire state. Provide funding to school districts on a quarterly basis to avoid districts having to short-term borrow and inefficiently to avoid short-term borrow and allow us to effectively use tax dollars. Provide additional funding for students on free and reduced lunch. Create a leveled approach on funding levels based on the level of need for students with disabilities to cover at least 60% of costs associated. Then we continued with funding, and then this is where we're a little bit different, as you might say. Everything that's kind of highlighted in yellow at this point in time was either conversation that we had but I didn't capture at that time, or it's additional information where I'm taking off my facilitator hat and putting on my superintendent hat and making a recommendation to the board for discussion to determine if you want to include this or not as a part of a platform principle. So we'll go through it, and then I'll put my facilitator hat on and ask, is this something that you deem that you would like to see or you would not like to see? So for funding, it's revise the revenue limits to be a floor amount rather than a ceiling amount. Provide funding that matches actual costs for transportation operation. Provide full funding for state regulations and mandates. And this one is one that your superintendent is making a recommendation, is provide 2 FTE headcount windows, one in September or October and one in January and February. The rationale behind making that recommendation to the board is because there's a lot of movement that happens after the 3rd Friday count. You're going to see this coming up here in a moment as well. I did not know the information I'm going to be sharing with you that's on the as a proposed legislative language that came out last night, literally. But you're going to see when we get there that they're looking to do this for private schools, but not for public schools, related specifically for special education. So the rationale again on that is because there are a lot of shifts that happen between the fall semester and the spring semester within school districts. This helps starting for the accountability piece of that. There's also components where There may be a student that had open enrolled into a different program and was removed from that program and it comes back to the school district, but there's no funding tied to that student when they come back because the only one of the windows that exist currently. It may be a situation where a child may not be special, have special needs in September, but come in January or February, they do. So it's a different approach in order to take a look at that. The red was one that was listed previously, however, when it went to the legislative committee, there was a request for it to be removed. So I'm bringing that forward to the entire board for a conversation. But it support the index revenue growth to match the consumer price index. In the discussion from the legislative committee, the concern about that was that this would be seen as a minimum, or not a minimum, but that would be the maximum rather than a minimum approach. So that was the concern related to this particular one. Mr. Evans, did I capture that? Am I capturing my memory correctly on that one?
Yeah, my memory's not as sharp, but it sounds like that would be something we would say.
Okay. Mr. Peschel?
I'm in favor of putting it aside, but I think it might be worth looking into defining that a little bit more for a future, for being involved in a future time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peschel. Ms. Carlin, do you recall?
I don't recall either.
Okay. And Dr. Herzog?
I'm afraid I don't.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry.
I appreciate, and pardon me for calling on the members.
Sorry.
The other one was a recommendation the superintendent is making to the board, and this is related to funding, is supporting the inclusion of the 2019-20 or the 2020-21, whichever is higher, as the student count number in the 3-year average. There currently is provision that gives a waiver for this current year, but that's only for 1 year of the 3-year average. This, by going forward with this, it would give it for all 3 years since this is an anomaly year. And what has happened across the entire state, and especially in districts of our size, is that they're finding that approximately 4 to 5% of the student population is not enrolled in the school, either due to homeschooling or going to parochial or possibly open enrolling. We spoke about it with our larger philosophies, the whole concept of equity, but we did not have a deep conversation related to this, but after talking with legislative committee, and also understanding general conversation from the board. This is new language because I didn't type it that night on the first work session. So I'm putting it in front of you so you're aware and make sure I captured it correctly. But allocate funding for providing professional development to district staff related to equity and best practices for procedures to discourage disproportionate practices via additional pay beyond the contracted days. And the rationale behind that, so I did, as superintendent, I squeezed in the piece of beyond contracted days, just so you're aware of that. And the rationale behind that is because right now it's very difficult within the teacher contract to find the appropriate amount of time that's necessary to provide the professional development that's needed. The second piece is allocate funding for providing professional development to district staff and develop resources to accompany written curriculum to learn about and apply the universal design for learning principles. You did not call out universal design for learning principles. Instead, you spoke about the principles in generals, and this was more at the legislative committee discussion level. And so based off the principles that in other words, teaching modality, it shouldn't be just one way. You should, when you're teaching, it should be, you should do it visually representative as well as verbal. And this was some of the arts kind of stuff, conversation that we had.
That I have a clear memory of.
And from an educational jargon, because unfortunately that's what this is educational jargon, what the committee was talking about literally was universal design for learning principles. And this is also a component that is at the national level and is in several states at this point in time. The acronym used for this is UDL, but it oftentimes is also associated with the multi-tier systems of support, or MTSS, previously as you might know as RTI, or response to intervention. So it's all kind of an alignment related to that. Before I go to the next slide, I wanted to have any conversation related to any of these highlighted principles to say, yes, we're good with this, or no, we're not really good with this, or did I not capture it accurately?
I just had one comment.
Ms. Carlin.
Yeah, I know we talked about this last time, but I was wondering if we could revisit linking anytime we say school safety and mental health, and we put them together. That's stigmatizing a little bit there, because when you put them together, it makes it sound like people with mental health are not safe or they're dangerous, and that's the stigma we're trying to break. So I don't know if we could just avoid linking them in the same sentence.
I apologize. Can you tell me which sentence you're looking at?
It's just earlier in the presentation we had it just school safety and mental health, and it makes me kind of cringe when I see that. Just
they were separate. Slide 7, if you can display that. I believe they're separate. Ms. Carlin is up there on the top.
Maybe
right now.
I'm looking at something.
Slide
different.
8 has.
Does it?
Has it listed under example topics, school safety and mental health, adequate funding to address.
Yeah.
And it's on slide 6 as well.
Just because the vast majority of
No
people
problem.
that have mental health problems are not dangerous. They're dangerous to themselves more likely than others. And I know you agree with me.
I absolutely agree with you. I did not modify that since that was in the previous presentation, so I apologize. It is modified in the future for all the new content on that.
Thank you.
And the example topics would not come in our final. This would be more of your final.
Great, thank you.
No, but you're absolutely right, Ms. Carlin. I 100% agree with you. Discussion?
I agree with Mrs. Carlin, so I'm glad to see those separated. Thank you.
And they're coming up on a future slide.
Sure. Thank you. On 12, they're separated clearly.
For slide 10, the one we're currently on, is there any discussion, any concerns, anything that you don't like, you would like it to be removed or modified? Pardon me for being a taskmaster on this.
No, that's good.
Just to echo what Bob said, is we should take out that support index revenue growth to match the consumer price index and discuss that a little further in detail.
Okay. It has been removed? Oh, my copy is removed. When he makes it, refreshes, it'll come back.
Point of order.
Oh, I was looking at you.
Sorry.
And I was like, what did, was that Liz?
So me being at home right now, trying to listen, you guys, when those of you that are further away from me, like I think the video and the sound is situated by Kelly and Jim, but anywhere outside of that, I have a really hard time hearing you guys clearly. So if we could speak closer to our mics, that would be much appreciated.
The mic is on this green thing here.
Thank you.
That's why.
He's not going to. So you can really hear us, huh? Got it.
Okay. Any other revisions for slide 10?
Hey, Bob, are you hearing Vicki okay?
Sorry, say that again?
Are you hearing Vicki okay?
Vicki and Dr. Herzog, Dr. Cartwright, Dr. Herzog, and School Board Member Carlin, it was very hard to hear them.
Okay. Dr. Cartwright, why don't you and I switch places so that then he can hear the presentation better? I will grab wipes. Is that okay?
I have the same. And we can switch back.
Yeah.
Do that close. You can actually run it from here.
I'll let you
On this
run it here.
Thank you.
Sure. Make it a little bit
Easier.
Try to psychically figure out which way you're going to walk. On the bottom is just the Zoom controls. And you can always hide those by clicking the 3 dots under More. If you ever want to hide those and get them out of your way, it's the 3 dots, and then it's hide floating menu controls. Right there. And then if you hit escape, we'll come right back.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, we're going to go ahead and proceed to slide 11. Mr. Peschel, can you hear me now?
I can hear you very well. Thank you.
Absolutely. So again, on slide 11 was topics I brought forward to the Legislative Committee as superintendent for conversation, and in blue highlighted were conversation from Legislative Committee members who wanted to add things to it as well. So infusion of arts into school programming. What we are looking at here is provide statewide guidance and financial support to proven methods to incorporate more visual and performing arts curricular and opportunities into the general curriculum. The thought process behind this is that looking at some either best practices or research-based practices where you have the opportunity to incorporate that visual and performing arts type of curriculum. We're very fortunate in the Oshkosh Area School District for our partnership with Arts Corps, because through that partnership, we're able to do a lot of these things currently. But it would be, again, that is something that we are doing through grants and donations, as well as district funding. And this is taking that just a little bit larger and saying not only, give us some statewide parameters, but also give us some financial support in order to do this. The second one was provide a resolution speaking towards the importance of visual and performing arts and developing students as critical thinkers. And this is a resolution that we're looking for from a larger perspective, not just from our local board, but from the legislators themselves. Two other points that were discussed was from committee members themselves was to revise the high school graduation requirements to include additional credit requirements for visual and performing arts. And then the other one was to support state curriculum focus towards, rather than STEM, make it STEAM. In other words, science, technology, engineering, the arts, and mathematics, STEAM, rather than science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM. So as you can see clearly here, there's an incorporation of the arts in between the two. And then student services, looking at students in need, support providing funding for 3-year-olds who are not on track to be school ready. Because even by the time they come to us in pre-K, if 4-year-old, usually by the 3-year mark, we're able to determine whether or not a child is on track to be school ready or not. So this is an expansion of the pre-K program. Conversation, discussion, concerns, any revisions?
No, I was pointing at you. You were going to something,
Yeah. The revised high school graduation requirements to include additional, what is the current? And what does that mean by additional? How much additional? And where, because most of so performing arts, that's all, from my understanding, all performing arts is like clubs. It's like, it's considered sports. So how is that a requirement for graduation? I'm confused by that.
Excuse me just a second.
Sure.
I'm getting you an answer.
Okay.
I was going to ask the same question, and I saw you, I read your body language and figured that's where you're going with that. So that you go first. But yeah, I had the same. I'd like to see specific details to know how I feel about that.
I agree with the STEAM, all of it, except I don't understand how we require credit for performing arts.
So, for example, it could, if I had to expand this out, because I believe this one was yours, Mr. Evans, but.
It doesn't sound like me.
My understanding on this, from a technical standpoint, a lot of times it could be that you have to have 2 credits toward that are some type of a visual or performing arts course. So it could be choir, it could be band, it could be art. Right. It could be any of those type of courses where you can officially take towards credit. So not a club per se, but a 4-credit course.
Right. Well, then I think we need to fix that language up.
Okay.
Because we don't have any performing arts classes that you can take, do we? That you can get credit for?
That'd be choir and band.
Band, okay.
Choir,
band,
orchestra.
choir, okay.
And
Yeah,
when I
drama,
was in school, they had a drama class.
Okay.
Yes.
And it's, okay. So then I was misunderstanding that. Got it. Okay. Then what do you mean by additional credits for that then? So what, going from what to what?
That's what I'm waiting for an answer on.
Okay.
And I don't know, I left it open
Okay.
for discussion.
I recall that meeting. But I don't remember a discussion about a specific number of credits, whether it was a quarter or a half or a full. I don't recall that the committee got into that amount of detail unless one of the rest of you who were there remember that differently.
So obviously that's a conversation we need to have, but like, you know, we can leave it on there because then, you know, obviously then the legislative committee talks about it and goes with it. But I just don't know that putting it, I guess my concern was adding it when I would have a concern with that. For kids who don't like arts and they want to go more towards science, they would rather take, you know, the botany classes and stuff. And then would we be pulling them away from their likes? They are required to take certain arts, and just like the opposite, you know, we can't require them to take more, you know, some of the other science classes so that they can take more of the art classes too.
If they're going to botany, they really have to learn how to draw. But that's,
yeah, right, yeah.
Part of this is the legislative committee.
Okay.
Is not only dealing with things that are affecting this school district, we're also legislating or working with senators at the state level.
Okay.
And
this is one of them?
This might go back to what is the curriculum at the state level. Oshkosh may be well exceeding that, we may be equal to it, we may be below it.
Okay, got it, okay.
Because I also had questions about what are the requirements, and I looked them up real quick on DPI. I'd imagine wherever Dr. Cartwright's trying to get her answer will be a little more direct. But when I look at a DPI, there aren't any. There's 3 math, 3 science, 4 English language arts, 3 social studies, 1.5 physical education, and half of health. And to your point where you talk about the sports being the equivalent of the clubs, right? So like being on a sports team to me is the equivalent of the physical education. And being on a club is the equivalent of being in these visual or performing art classes. And I do think that the only word I can think of is interesting that there's such high physical education requirements and no visual or performing arts. I would think they should be equal because you should introduce kids to both areas and then they would be able to choose, well, I really like the physical education, so I'll do intramurals or team sports, or I really like visual and performing arts, so I'll do these clubs. I feel like that's not fair if we're only introducing them to one. Did you get an answer?
I do.
All right, what's the answer? Is DPI
It's policy
correct?
5460, which is our graduation requirements. And it actually falls under the category of electives, which right now is 7.5.
Right.
And I think what the request is to pull it out of electives and have it separate. Am I understanding that correctly?
That would be good.
I think that legislative has to work with like education on that, right? Like that, we would bring that to. Okay.
We could do that. One of the things I also just want to remind the board on this one, just as far as being a little careful on it, is because we also want to be mindful of local control as well.
Yeah. Okay. Obviously, there needs to be a big discussion about it, so we can leave it on there.
All right, and again, this is not something you have to do this year.
Right. Yeah, well, yeah.
Everyone okay with it? Any other questions?
So I do have a question. So if we leave it on there, that means we are going to advocate or lobby for the legislature to consider it?
We bring it, not right now, because that would be our short term.
Yeah.
But it would be one of those areas that we would look to do potentially in the future. And then you would flush it out a lot more.
Okay, yes, because I'm feeling like we need to flush that out a lot more.
Flush it out before we go there.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. But I like the idea, and I do think it's good for us to flush it out, keep it, so I don't want to delete it, but I
agree with you.
I don't want to go
Yeah.
advocate for it before we have
I think we're
done
on
our
the same
work.
page, yeah.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Anything else? Okay. These are pulled out separate. One is related to school safety. Continue to provide additional funding to create more secure buildings. And again, these were ones that were brought to the legislative committee, and so now being brought forward to the entire board. Then on mental health, we had a lot of discussion on this. Allocate funding to provide additional mental health personnel or contracted services with mental health organizations to give services to students in need. Provide grant opportunities for innovative methods for school districts to provide services to students and staff, such as therapy dogs, on-site counselors for drop-in visits, etc. And then lastly, provide additional funding to expand social workers, nurses, counselors, and school psychologist staff. Any additions, removals, or revisions? Okay. Everyone good?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just doing ample wait time. Personnel, staff pay, recruitment, and retention. What was discussed was support legislation that allows for reciprocity agreements from other states for licensed teachers without as many restrictions, test scores, or additional coursework. Establish provisions to allow for retired teachers to be rehired by school districts, and providing provisions and substitute teacher requirements to allow for an expansion to increase substitute teacher availability. And then facilities, which was discussed, create funding mechanism that matches the district effort and cost of new construction or major renovation projects. Allow the previous practice that allowed districts to tax locally for recommended energy initiatives to move districts forward more towards where, and this is a technical term called green schools that is technically identified at the federal level, such as addressing greenhouse gases, solar energy, or geothermal heating or cooling. Any questions, concerns, removals, revisions, additions?
And just a quick comment, I think under personnel, that second item, establish provisions to allow for rehiring of substitute teachers, I believe is on the Policy and Resolutions Committee's agenda for the State School Board Association in January for all 421 districts to thumbs up or thumbs down to help the direction of the Wisconsin Association of School Boards lobbying efforts.
And just for note, there has been a PI 34 emergency rule that has gone into effect, effective today. This afternoon, 4 hours ago, was when I was notified. Basically stating that the rule amends for short-term substitute provisions in PI 34 to allow for extended assignments. So they are starting to make some revisions to the substitute teacher requirements. Any additions? Are we good with this one? Mm-hmm. Okay. So the next thing we're going to want to do is now is where we're going to want to start thinking about what's the platform that you want to focus on for this school year. So that would be this upcoming, December, January, February time period. Now, we had given you some example areas to consider, and tonight we had asked you to bring forward 3 to 5 specific items. But as you know, yesterday evening, there was a new language that was proposed. All of you should have received a copy of that. And so I'm going to very quickly go through that, not that I'm trying to influence what your opinions are on that. However, the update related to this area is that as you know, anything that's proposed forward has to go forward. If it gets passed, then it has to go to the governor, and the governor does have veto rights going from there. So I'm real high level going through it, but just to highlight some of those things so that you're prepared for that. What it was titled was Proposed Response to the COVID-19 Pandemic. And so this is proposed language. And there are going to be several areas for which they have identified that. You also have this available in hard copy in front of you just in case. But there were 7 different areas that were listed. What I have done for you just for ease of reading is I've gone through and made sure that on each one of these kind of highlighted the language that's included in those in this proposal that may be concerning to public school districts. So with the open, I don't want to, do you all need me to read this verbatim? Okay. So open enrollment program modifications, the couple things in here that's really, that I would encourage the board to pay attention to is the highlighted area. So the pupil's resident school district may not reject the application for any reason. When we talk about best interest of the pupil, it is of the district's opinion that when we're talking about this, the ability for parents to move children from school district to school district to school district multiple times throughout the school year is not in the best interest of the pupil. I can personally attest, because as I mentioned before, all of you know my background, 7th grade was a wash for me because I attended so many middle schools for very much different reasons than this. And in some schools, I was told I was very smart, and in other schools, I was told I was very behind. So if you can imagine what that does to a child's mental status and their ability in order to achieve or accomplish growth, academic achievement, or any type of academic growth is very difficult.
Would this be difficult too if we have people that are expelled and then they're trying to enroll in would this fall under that also, or is that
no, expulsions is something that is different.
So it doesn't come into this.
That's correct.
Good. Okay.
However, by taking out, it may apply to a non-resident district at any point in time in the school year if the pupil meets one of the criteria specified in the statute. So all of the planning that a school district typically does as far as being able to even class sizes and those type of things and plan appropriately in order to staff your school district, that starts becoming extremely challenging. You always have children moving in and out of your district, but it depends on the amount of students who are open enrolling into or out of your district. That becomes highly problematic for a district to staff appropriately throughout the year. The other thing also to take in mind is don't forget about funding. You're funded on the third Friday count of September. So now you have a student who's moved in or, has moved in, and you have a lot of students who have, are open enrolling into your district, and it comes without any funding attached to it. So those are just some of the cautionary things related to this one. Ms.
So I'm
Garner.
wondering, where did this come from? What is the problem that this is trying to solve?
At this point in, I can only give you an opinion.
Okay.
So please understand that it is a personal opinion on this, because I do not have a legal debrief on this. A lot of it is for families who, okay, this school district is virtual, but this one is in person, so I'm going to open enroll into this school. Maybe I have childcare needs. And then, okay, now this school district just went virtual, and I'm going to hop back to the other one because maybe they're back in person. So that they could do that. The rationale behind that explanation was because of a proposed bill that I believe came out in October, November time period. No, it wasn't that recent. It would have been towards the end of the beginning of the school year, September, because we were still over the Tipler gym when it came out. And it was a different representative that had proposed that.
And so this is meant to allow that to continue to happen.
Not to continue to happen, to happen. To encourage it to happen.
I don't know if I read that as encouraging, but at least it opens the door that if a district cannot reject, I don't think parents are suddenly going to be open enrolling all over town. However, that's why I'm wondering, I mean, that's really like getting into the weeds, in my opinion.
This starts getting into local control a little bit.
Big time.
And that is going to be a common theme that you see throughout all of the 7 pieces.
So that's why I'm trying to wrap my arms around, like, what is the issue that this is addressing?
For us, we take open enrollment throughout the year, for the most part.
Yes.
However, there are districts that do stick to that February and April time period to apply for open enrollment. And it doesn't apply to us, per se, because we do it year-round, provided we have the capacity, right?
Yep, sure.
But for other districts, many others will stick with that time period.
All right. Thank you.
Everyone good? And this was just continuing the language on that. Personal electronic computing device grants. I think it's wonderful that they're looking to transfer a little over $9 million for personal electronic computing device grants. Quite frankly, I think this is something that is absolutely needed, because there are districts that do not have funding available for devices or hotspots, those type of things. And this does address a larger need. However, it is the highlighted portion of this language that is highly concerning. A school board that receives funding under the Education Stabilization Fund created in the Federal Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or otherwise known as CARES Act, and uses the funding for purchasing educational technology would not be eligible for funding under the Personal Electronic Computing Device Grant Program in 2020-21. So for example, whereas this board authorized the district to purchase Chromebooks for kindergarten through 2nd grade, we utilized a portion of that to pay for that through our CARES Act, as well as we used part of the CARES Act funding to pay for like our hotspots and those kind of things. Did it cover the entire cost? Not by a long shot. But because we've already used some of that money in order to pay, to pay it, this is an all or none approach. And it's not double dipping. We're not trying to double dip. We're trying to say, okay, the CARES Act paid for this amount of what was needed to pay for it, but this amount came out of our general budget. And we would apply for the grant for this smaller amount. But the way it's worded.
To stop double dipping, and what you're saying is there never was any, the CARES Act doesn't fully
cover the cost.
So we have to go back into our own budget, or we can go to grants. And this is saying you can't go to a grant.
we've already applied for the CARES Act. We've already used our CARES Act money.
So now we can't apply for the grant.
That,
if-
right, this is, you know,
All right.
this is language that was proposed after the game started.
Yep. Yeah. Yes.
So the next one is just continuing it through, just what's eligible, those kind of things. And the third one is about the virtual instruction reports. And this particular one, it's quite frankly, it's not anything that we have a concern as far as being able to provide the information that they're looking. However, it is of concern as you get deeper into the language, into 3D. And the way in which, and this is, okay, so this is an opinionated statement I'm giving you, okay? It is in my opinion, the way in which this is stated is giving the illusion that by providing virtual instruction, there's cost savings to a school district. So I'll let you see that for yourselves. Total amount by which the school board reduced or increased expenditures in each of the following categories because the school board provided virtual instruction. Utilities, in other words, how much did you save because you weren't in person? Transportation, how much did you save because you weren't having to transport students? Food service, which I'm hoping there's not that much of a cost savings for district because we're required to provide, you know, for students home free and reduced lunch. Salary and fringe benefits for personnel, including teachers, submit staff, administrators, including reductions that may result from layoffs. The only ones within the Oshkosh area school district would have been for example, some of our food service providers, because we weren't providing as much food, you know, at every one of our sites. Therefore, some of the ones who would actually be the ones, you know, putting the food out. And then contract terminations. Because we are not 100% virtual, and that's something that people forget about, we still provide in-person instruction for our neediest students. These are students with significant disabilities, students with disabilities, and has gone through a regression matrix. It is for our English learners who do not have English acquisition, and also for those students who are struggling academically and they need maybe some one-on-one mentoring or tutoring or small group tutoring that happens. So for these students, our buildings are still open. So therefore, we are not having cost savings when it comes to utilities. There may be a slight cost savings to transportation because we're not transporting all of our students. However, we are required under our transportation contract to pay a certain percentage of that contract, is somewhere in the 80%, somewhere in that margin. Food service, we are still delivering food to our schools where we're providing these services so that students have access to breakfast as well as lunch. Plus, we are also continuing to run our programs out of the 2 high schools in order to provide food for any student who shows up. Salary and fringe benefits for personnel, including teachers. Well, we have not had layoffs with our teachers. We continue to offer the full array of courses that we have always done in person or in a virtual mode. With our paraprofessionals, again, we're working with our paraprofessionals because they're working alongside with their teachers in order to provide services to our students. Likewise, we have not had a reduction in administrators. In fact, we've had somewhat of an increase, as you might say, because, for example, our principal on assignment is supposed to be going out and mentoring and working with our newer principals and such, yet at this point in time, our principal on assignment is the one who's running our E-Academy program. So that's just kind of giving you some examples and why I said what I said, as to it seems as though they're looking for reductions, but we also have increased expenditures. Our cleaning costs have gone up significantly. In order to implement a lot of our safety protocols, even for the students who are coming in person right now, when we return back into hybrid mode, or I shouldn't say we return, but transition back into hybrid, that's a much better word, transition, into hybrid mode, then at that point in time, the costs associated with that are greater than your typical school year, as you might say. Ms. Olmstead.
So this is just asking for a report, though.
It is, but how are they using that report?
Right, but it says that the total amount by which the school reduced or increased.
And
they're asking for both.
Those categories.
Right.
And what I'm explaining to you is there's categories that aren't listed up there.
Right, yeah.
What is the term submit staff? I've never seen that before.
I'm making an assumption, but that would be, for example, like your clerical, paraprofessionals.
Okay.
It may be custodial.
All right, thank you.
And the completion of it is again, that's nominal. That's something that we could easily provide. This one was interesting. The Special Needs Scholarship Program, partial payments, if you'll recall, going back to our funding conversation where I was making a recommendation that you're funded twice a year. In other words, you had two head count windows, because in essence, that's what they're doing. But they're only doing it for those participating in the private school and the Special Needs Scholarship Program. So in other words, if there was a student that's participating in the program but on the third Friday of September was not identified as a student with disability and did not have an individualized education plan, then what happens at that point in time, they get funded at a regular rate. Under this proposal, what they are stating is that, well, let's take a look at it again, and if on the second Friday of January, they're now receiving services and have been identified as a students with disability, then we're going to provide additional funding for them. However, they do not do this for public schools. The formula as to what the additional payment is listed below the highlighted section.
Any idea why this isn't? Am I being
didn't dare ask. I don't want-
naive? But is there a big problem with special ed kids in private schools?
I wouldn't say necessarily problem. I would say instead that it is a significant increase in the funding that's provided for a student with special needs.
And how is this different during COVID?
I would not be able to answer.
Feels like it's from left field. Like,
yeah.
I would not be able to answer that question, Ms. Gardner. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm just trying to
No,
interpret.
it's okay that you don't know.
The next one is teacher instruction from school buildings. And the specific language of concern on here is basically what they're saying is that if you're in a virtual instruction environment, all teachers must be providing instruction from the physically located in a school building starting on January 31st, 2021, and continue to do that all the way through the remainder of the school year. Interestingly, it specifies that this provision would not apply to virtual charter schools. So that means our E-Academy program, all of those teachers would have to be physically located in a school because they are not a virtual charter school.
I won't ask.
I'm sorry. It specifies that the hours of direct pupil instruction may be provided by a teacher who is not physically located in a school building if the teacher submits to the school board a COVID-19 related written exemption from a physician or physician assistant licensed in the state. Not really sure how to interpret that language, not sure if that means that these are the accommodation requests. So for example, right now we get accommodation requests through our HR department. And we look at those on a case-by-case basis. It is documented, and there are situations for which individuals are working from home as a part of their federally protected accommodation, okay? I'm not sure if this means that, okay, a teacher is either a close contact or has COVID at this point in time and has to quarantine or isolate. The concern on this one is Does this mean that they still have to come in person to teach when they're supposed to be quarantining or isolating?
Submits a COVID-related written exemption.
Meaning that they don't have to come to work.
It has to be COVID-related.
Right.
So that gets into some legal things, you know, some potential legal considerations like HIPAA. What are we required? What can we require from employees, and what can't we?
Yeah.
So in other words, it puts it back into those federal protections and that process, which a lot of times is not something that gets resolved within a day or two.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so that's kind of the concern on this.
The last sentence too is a concern. So it says that none of that applies 60 days after, you know, COVID, so then they don't. So I would assume that that is directly applying to, even if they have a COVID-related exemption from a doctor, 60 days after the COVID vaccine is available
Widely
in our state,
available.
then they can't do that anymore.
Correct.
That's correct.
That's how, okay, that's what we're reading. Okay.
And this is the interesting component of this, is that if you, as a board, you would have to certify to DPI whether or not you complied with that requirement, you know, to the fullest extent. And if you do not, then by the March date, you would, the district would lose 25% of its total payment for the equalization aid payment. And then at the end, then it continues after that March 5th date all the way to the end of the school year. And then again, if you do not do that at full compliance, then you lose 35% of your total equalization aid payment. School board approval of virtual instruction. This, in essence, would mean that the school board is the only governing board that can make the decision.
That's what this says.
Uh-huh.
This means we can't use if we use the matrix, it means we're doing the matrix then.
Every 2 weeks, by the way.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
It's
and
gotta be 2/3 full, it's gotta be
Eh.
majority.
We cannot provide virtual, so what they're trying, it sounds like they want kids in school. If we want to go virtual, it's because the board votes 2/3, and then it looks like it's only valid for 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have to extend it by 2/3 every time. So
Correct.
this is really driving us to get kids back in school.
Correct.
In person. Okay.
And it's unsure if this means 5 days a week or hybrid, because hybrid means that you are still providing some
Virtual.
form of virtual instruction.
It just says may not provide virtual instruction in lieu of in-person. It doesn't even say how many days, so I think that means everything, hybrid and virtual.
Unless approved by a 2/3 vote of the board.
Every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks.
So they're making it really clear.
Oh, yeah.
And this goes back to what you had mentioned earlier, Ms. Garner, related to local control.
Yeah.
And then the last item, payments to parents for virtual instruction. Requires that if a school board provides virtual instruction to a pupil in lieu of in-person instruction during the 2020-21 school year, the board shall pay $371 to the parent or guardian of the student. Specify that this provision would also apply to schools that have virtual instruction for 50% of the semester. So again, this one is changing the rules of the game mid-year. And it would prohibit us from having hybrid without having to make payment.
And where did they get that number?
I had the same thought.
It's a weird number, isn't it?
371's random.
But for us, this would be well over $3 million. And I'll remind the board that we just went for an operational referendum to renew 371.
It's 300 to a parent, and if we have 10,000 kids, that's 300,000. Oh, no, you're right, it's 3 million, sorry. I'm off by a zero. Oh, Oh, my gosh.
I like your number better, though.
Yeah.
I do too.
So if this goes through, do we have to reimburse?
It's so new, I would not, again, I apologize, I can't answer a lot of your questions.
Yeah.
It's just my responsibility to ensure that you are aware of it at this point.
And it doesn't specify if, as a parent, I chose to have one of my 3 children in E-Academy. And it doesn't specify, right, if that is.
E-Academy is exempt, I think, because there is no in-person instruction for E-Academy. So I think this only
Yeah,
applies
so that's
to
the
kids.
in lieu of in-person instruction.
Yeah.
Again, that would be something that would be a part of the rulemaking process that goes through. So in other words, if this were to pass, then it goes to another level of interpreting
I
this
think, yes,
language.
I think they could still, though, say that, like, I, as a parent, I chose virtual in lieu of in-person, but I think
Good point.
I think they
Yeah.
could still say that, I don't know.
Not to throw more fire on there, but can you imagine Milwaukee and Madison, what their numbers would be? Because they're virtual.
Yeah.
Green Bay. Green Bay and Appleton.
They're bigger than us.
Sheboygan is now.
Okay.
Okay.
That's gonna
So
be
when
fun.
are they looking at this?
Well,
Or
this
never mind,
is,
you
this
can
is
finish.
the Republican Assembly response to COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah.
This is, and it's not even written up in a form, this is just put up by the Legislative Bureau of what their plan is. I think they had a big wish list of things they wanted to get done over the last couple decades probably, and they kind of put a lot of that in here.
Yeah.
The Republican Senate is not really enthused about it. They're still not talking about not coming back until the new Senate gets sworn in. So this is purely the Republican Assembly. As Vicki said, if it does get into law, the governor would have to either sign it or veto it, or as you know, our governor has the line item veto that he can use on it too.
Okay.
I think the way the state legislative process works is that when someone has a bill, a proposal for a law, it goes to the Legislative Fiscal Bureau to determine or to estimate approximate costs. And so I think that's why the cover sheet on the front reads as it does, from the Bureau to Representative Voss, who's the Speaker of the Assembly. But this just came out on
Last night.
Tuesday, yesterday, yeah. And there are dates in here, as you can see, that are at the end of January 2021. There are March dates 2021. So these would need to be acted on quickly if those dates were to go into effect.
But I wanted to at least bring this to the knowledge of the board as you are defining out what are those specific priorities that you would like to focus on, so that you had knowledge of this and can make an informed recommendation or decision.
When does the legislative committee meet again? I guess they meet this month, right?
Our board, yeah, they
Yeah.
meet in 2 weeks.
Is
But
that-
the handout that you have has the entire
Yes.
thing, and then there's other
Yeah.
interesting things in
I'm
there.
gonna
if
go read
you-
the rest of it.
If you read into it a little bit more, it's a lot of,
So for example, liability, to hold harmless, related to liability for governmental entities, like school districts.
That's in here?
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
Up on it. Okay.
So I know this is new since it just came out yesterday, but is it something we'd want the legislative committee to look at and come up with how to formulate a response? Or, I mean, is that?
I guess my question is, this is more of an informational. So that you can see the thought process that is coming from some members of the legislature, not all. And so that it was my responsibility to keep you informed on that. because this is the largest document I think we've had in a long time. And wanted you, as we started getting into defining what are the priorities that you would like for the legislative committee and as a board to focus on, what are those areas that you would like to focus on? Maybe keeping this in the back of your mind, but not necessarily saying, I'm going to address every piece of this.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for the clarity. And that may have been given at the beginning, but then we went all over it and I.
No. Yeah.
May I make a suggestion related to these?
Yes, sir.
So, because I feel that these are important enough to be part of our, I think we're referring to them as our platform policy or platforms.
Our priorities.
That we could create a new title of a project area. Say, let's call it COVID 2021 legal response or legislation. But don't put anything in it right now, but create that, because I think it's important that we acknowledge this at this odd time in our history, that we now are going to be needing to create priorities related to COVID as it relates to 2021. So I'm suggesting that we create, like we create personnel and facilities, that we just create a COVID 2021 segment there, and then send all these back to the legislative committee to discuss how we want them to be prioritized, or even suggesting what of these would be agreeable, what of these would not be agreeable, if we advocate for language amendment to the certain language, something like that. So that's just my thought.
This is the suggestion that Mr. Peschel was making, is on our defining our state platform principles, that we add a new category called COVID-19 2020-21. I'll put school year.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Well, I think it could go into 21, 22, because some of the stuff even in here was, the COVID, any new legislation that comes out with COVID or any CARES or any, effect has to be definitely looked at, on a good timely basis. Yeah. Yeah, because I think it's going to affect the fall for sure. Some of the, these numbers will, because of the budgets and the funding.
So is it the desire of the board to take this back to the legislative committee to list out specific priorities that you want to look at for the platform?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes? So is everyone in agreement with that?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We're going to take this to the legislative committee, and then we'll bring it back to board. It'll be on the first board meeting in January for final approval.
Okay, great. Perfect.
Everyone good?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
At this point in time, I'll transition this back over to Dr. Herzog.
Okay. All right, so we're to define the 2020-21 priorities with specific items, correct?
That will go forward. That'll go to the legislative committee, and then we'll bring it back to the board, the first board meeting in January.
Okay, so I misunderstood. I thought, I was thinking something else. Okay, so does that mean we have any further discussion on this legislative topic tonight, or does this mean we are at an end?
We're at an end for the workshop.
Okay, got it. All right, any final thoughts or comments before we move on with the rest of the agenda then? All right. So the next agenda item then is individually considered resolutions. Let me just grab that. Okay, resolution number 1, be it resolved that the Oshkosh Area School District Board of Education commit an additional $30,000 to extend the agreement with the City of Oshkosh to provide free transportation to students on Go Transit Oshkosh for a 3rd year, as filed with the Secretary to the Board of Education.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion?
I just hope that we get to use it.
Yes, there was an article in the Herald today which reported the number of students who have utilized this, and so there are over 2,000 students who have used this, according to the article in today's Herald.
I asked Drew, hi Drew, for the numbers as well, because we're already asking for the 3rd year funding. We haven't even gotten through the 1st year. I was really curious as to why is that happening, and then just to see what ridership is. And it's gone down, actually, since this was implemented. That doesn't mean anything. We have 3 months of data, so it doesn't really show us anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't sure if the money from Oshkosh Corp, is that being earmarked for the 3rd year?
May I go into explanation?
Absolutely.
So what happens at this point in time is that the city council has recognized that ridership is off this year.
Yeah.
In other words, we would not get to be able to have the full experience of this. They have some potential additional funds that they can use in order to cover for the private donation side of that. So in essence, we'll continue to pay our portion of it that we have. However, they're going to assume the additional money that the private organization would have paid this year, which was Oshkosh Corp for this 1 year of $30,000.
Okay.
So they're going to assume that additional cost for this year.
Okay.
The city is. They're going to apply that $30,000 to next year, so to year 2.
I see.
So all we're doing is extending our financial commitment for a 3rd year beyond what we've already committed to. So ridership for students in grades 6 through 12 in September was 2,209.
Yeah.
In October was 1,389.
Yeah.
November was 1,416.
Yeah.
For kindergarten through 6th grade, so I'm thinking there's an overlap somehow there. September 152, October 219, November 230. And then for parochial 6 through 12, September was 67, October was 27, November was 18.
Yep. Yeah. So is there a reason that we have to come up with the 3rd year, our decision on the 3rd year now? Is there like a urgency of some sort? Because I keep thinking we're in the midst of a pandemic. We've got a lot of balls in the air right now, and trying to think of the 3rd year of Go Transit, to me, this just feels like I don't feel like this is the time we're having this conversation. I suspect it's being driven by the city council, but I'm not, okay, so maybe that's why.
That's how I understood it, right?
The request came forward to us from the city.
So they're anxious to shore up that 3rd year.
And I don't know if it's due to potential other types of funding sources that may expire.
And I hate to earmark $30,000 of our money if we don't even know if that program is working. And I get, nobody's riding the bus, I know. And I still don't want to earmark anything for year 3 because we don't know the fallout from what's happening right now. So those are my concerns. Thank you.
Other comments? I believe that some of the thinking, and I don't know where I saw this, maybe it was the Oshkosh Northwestern, I just don't recall, was that because this is such an unusual year, it's difficult to draw conclusions about future ridership. So I think that was part of the rationale that I read. It had to be either in the Herald or the Oshkosh Northwestern about this topic. Now, if the board chooses to vote in favor of this, then it would mean that anyone who votes in the affirmative could ask to bring this back for review for a future vote. But it would have to be somebody who voted, or with the majority, that is.
Yeah,
Mr.
go ahead,
Peschel.
Bob. Mr. Peschel?
Thank you. So part of the discussion on the city level, at least in regards to the city council level, was really wanting to give the program a fair shot to succeed. You know, because we know that this first year is going to be kind of a wash in regards to its success. So the other thing was that it also made it by going with this type of agreement, it makes it easier to fundraise with our partners in the community, you know, for that third year, because if we just stuck to a 2-year, it's hard to fundraise any dollars right now outside of basic needs and in other areas. And so the fundraising on the private side would have and is challenging at this point. So so those are kind of two of the areas. And you know, the city kind of feels like it's you know, utilizing some funds that it has available to kind of make that extension of that program up to that third year. You know, it doesn't benefit, you know, it benefits the school district because we still get to have kids riding the bus for free, but we still had to invest that money, but it benefits the greater longevity, short-term longevity of that program and the partnerships within the community by extending it that third year at this point. So again, we built into the contract the ability to collect data and to analyze that data in the best circumstances. And so that stuff, so those aspects will continue on the Go Transit side, you know, next year, next September, when ideally we're in a much better circumstance to be providing that program to students to be able to ride the buses affluently. So my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you. If I may, Dr. Herzog?
Absolutely. Please go ahead. I'm just reading the contract here.
And originally when this, it's a change in the dates. Originally when this occurred, this board had previously had actually approved a 3-year contract. Council then said, let's make it 2 years, and then we approved the 2-year from that. So.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Then please call the roll.
Peschel.
Aye.
Carlin.
Aye.
Evans.
Aye.
Garner.
Aye.
Herzog.
Aye.
Olmsted.
Aye.
Szilagyi.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Resolution number 2, be it resolved that the Oshkosh Area School District Board of Education approve the Oshkosh Area School District Safety Plan for 2021 as filed with the Secretary to the Board of Education.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion, any comments, any questions from the board? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Szilagyi.
Aye.
Carlin.
Aye.
Evans.
Aye.
Garner.
Aye.
Herzog.
Aye.
Olmsted.
Aye.
Peschel.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next agenda item is request for future agenda items. Does anyone have a future agenda item they'd like to see coming up? Seeing none, are there any announcements tonight? Any announcements tonight? Seeing none, next agenda item is adjourn to executive session. Considering the employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility under Wisconsin Statute 19.85, paren 1, paren C, a internal complaint matter.
So moved.
Second. Please call the roll.
Carlin.
Aye.
Evans.
Aye.
Garner.
Aye.
Herzog.
Aye.
Olmsted.
Aye.
Peschel.
Aye.
Szilagyi.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned into executive session.
Thank you. Let's plan to resume at 8:40.